The question.
I like that.
We are live.
Oh, right.
All right. Welcome everybody to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee on Wednesday, February 12th. We are here with Adam Kane from the Fairbanks Museum to briefly learn about all of their energy efficiency efforts. So Adam, we'll quickly go around the room and introduce ourselves. And then we always have our committee assistant and any guests in the room introduce themselves, and then we'll turn it over to you and you can identify yourself for the record. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kluffner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Sibilia, Wyndham 2.
Jack Locker, committee assistant.
Evan Kern, 3L student intern with the Craftsing Group.
So 3L. Is that third year law? Okay, awesome. All right, Adam, and if you could identify yourself for the record, please.
Sure. Adam Kane, I'm the executive director of the Fairbanks Museum and Planetarium.
Great. So we have, I think, about half an hour, right? Yes, to learn about your work. So I wasn't sure if you had slides or a presentation.
I do have a presentation. Am I able to share my screen?
Yeah, Jack can help you out with that.
Yep, you should be good. Just all right.
Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So yeah, what I'm going to do is just walk you through really the last 10 years of the Fairbanks Museum and what we've been up to in terms of both renewable energy and our climate change resiliency work, which is, really, we've spent a lot of time in the last decade trying to button up these two pieces of the museum's work. So first, and as I go through here, please, by all means, if there are questions as I'm talking, please do. I'm happy to just kind of run things on the fly. I did manage to just go over in a Senate committee meeting earlier, so I'm going to try and go as quickly as I can here.
Great. Adam, just make sure you're speaking right into your mic. We're having a little hard time hearing you.
So how is that? Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is just an overview of the Fairbanks Museum's campus. It's an 1.5 acres right in downtown St. Johnsbury, and it both shows you the opportunity and the problem we have. The opportunity is it's a great location. We have 4 buildings, one of which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and you couldn't build again if you tried. But like a lot of Vermont's housing stock, it's old. Our youngest building was built in 1915, and everything else is older. So there are all sorts of different systems, old windows, leaky foundations, the whole 9 yards of what you see in in buildings across the state. We have right in our backyard. This slide is just to show. This would be, if the Fairbanks Museum was sitting on $100 million, this would all be pretty easy to do. But we don't really have any money. So the total, this is an overview of our finances throughout the early 2000s. So we have a net worth of like $3 to $4 million, an annual operating budget of about $1 million. There's just not a lot of money in the bank. I cannot cut checks for $100,000 solar installations and things like that. We've got to figure it out at every point how to fund things. So the first project we did was in 2015, and this was really looking at, okay, what's the easiest thing that we could pull off that's going to have the most amount of impact? And for us, that was replacing all of the fluorescent and incandescent lights that are in the main museum that most, if not all of you have visited. These were 400 fixtures. 400 light fixtures in that building. So we replaced all those with LEDs. We did that with a donation from a private donor and then a significant rebate from Efficiency Vermont. So that was really the first work that we did. That took us about 6 weeks. We had to close the whole museum, pull everything apart, and to get that piece buttoned up. Right on the heels of that, we put in our first solar installation. So this is in our parking lot, which is immediately beside the campus. This was a little 10 kilowatt solar array, net metered. We're in the GMP utility area. So, we use their net metering system. This was done with a GMP grant and a little bit of money from a private donor. It also helped us fix a really unsightly parking lot issue that we had. So that really got us we started to really roll after that, and we started to see the electricity bills come down. And so you'll see as we go on, the projects get kind of more ambitious and more complicated and significantly larger in terms of funding. Our second solar installation was we bought offsite solar at through Green Mountain Community Solar at an installation they put in Groton. So this was funded through USDA Community Facilities Grant and another private donor. USDA, by the way, has been amazing to us over the last decade. There's a lot of funding through USDA. Our next installation was a 60 kilowatt off solar array, again built by another company, this time Solaflect. This array is located right above the hospital in St. Johnsbury. This was a Northern Borders Regional Commission grant, and then a bunch of private foundations. So this was a 60 kilowatt solar array, and then we transitioned two of our 4 buildings over to air source heat pumps. So those were, pretty large systems that we put in to try and repower and, get our buildings to the extent we could off of fuel oil and onto heat pumps. The next project we did, this one was significantly more complicated than the others. So we received applied for and received a significant Economic Development Administration grant. So that's federal money to put in a large solar parking array, EV charging, battery backups in all the buildings, and bury the power lines that were strung through the museum's backyard. I'll add that these funds were received during the first Trump administration. And, for the Fairbanks Museum, where, we have climate change kind of written all over everything we do and in every exhibit, and we have climate change policies, et cetera. We were able to pull down these grant funds without talking about climate change. This was all about, as far as the grant was concerned, about economic development and electrical grid resiliency. So, I think one of the lessons here that we're in a world that we're entering into is, you really have to sort of talk to your audience. And so we spoke to the meaningful pieces things that were meaningful to the first Trump administration, and those, economic development in this case really lines up with climate change. So this a couple of things that were considerations in this project. We did level 2 EV chargers because we wanted to land folks in downtown St. Johnsbury for a couple of hours rather than fast chargers. They were also way cheaper than fast chargers. But it was important to us for folks to come in and to spend 2 or 3 hours charging in downtown St. Johnsbury, visit the museum, visit all the other businesses that are around us. So that was a really deliberate choice in this process. We also buried the power lines that were in the backyard. The rationale for that was the resiliency of the electrical grid. However, for us, it also got rid of power lines that were strung through our backyard and was an absolute prerequisite to building a addition on the back of the museum, because we were within a Green Mountain Power right-of-way, so we really couldn't use our backyard as far as building anything with power lines strung through the back of it. And then on to sort of the really big last project. So we just finished this up almost exactly a year ago. This is our Tang Science Annex. This is an $8 million project in addition on the back of the museum, largely in terms of the public benefit built around exhibit areas for hands-on STEM exhibits and accessibility to the historic museum. But within that, it has a whole bunch of climate change components woven into it. It's the state of Vermont's first mass timber building. So this building is constructed of eastern hemlock cross-laminated timbers. It's the first building in the world built out of eastern hemlock, CLT. we chose to build a mass timber building because it had sustainability characteristics that were really consistent with the mission of the Fairbanks Museum, and it was also something, type of building that we thought could, attract significant grant funding to help us build it. So,
Adam, could you find us what mass timber is? I saw a little exhibit on it at the Chicago Architecture Museum, and I can't remember the details.
sure, yeah. So in essence, mass timber is taking wood in its various components and using them as the primary structure for buildings. And most of that is done by laminating wood together into various pieces. So you see this a lot with what are called glue laminated beams. You see them in new buildings all over the place, which is to say they're wood that is laminated together from smaller pieces of wood to make larger sections. So this building, we see all those vertical columns are all laminated pieces of wood that are put together, but the flooring is made of it's called cross-laminated timber. So the floors, which completely replace what would be a rafter or joist system, are panels that are 5.5 inches thick, 12 feet wide, and 20 feet long. So they're laminated, hundreds and thousands of pieces of Eastern hemlock, 2x6s that are laminated together that make an extremely strong building where you are sequestering carbon, that have incredible fire resistance abilities. This building is out of Eastern hemlock. As I mentioned, that's important because Eastern hemlock is a type of wood which we have a significant volume of in Vermont, but does not have has relatively limited economic value. So it sort of, in terms of the forestry industry, it's where folks would like to see, going from saw logs into, a really high-end building pieces that can really generate a lot more revenue for the forestry industry rather than, firewood, for example.
Thanks.
Yep, sure. So that mass timber piece was really key to, we got a USDA congressional appropriation through then Congressman Welch, $2.5 million, Northern Borders Regional Commission grant, significant state funding into this through the capital investment program. So it was a really important piece of pulling this building off. The building is also heated and cooled with a ground source geothermal system. So there are two 800-foot wells that pull the heating and cooling load for the building. I will add that part of that calculation of installing that system is we thought we would get 30% of the cost, which is close to $1 million back, a little bit over $1 million back through the Inflation Reduction Act, which we don't know if we're going to get anymore. So that's a little bit of a question mark. We're trying to hurry up, get our 2024 990s and taxes in to see if we can actually pull down that money, because it seems like the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be repealed. Unhelpful. Another really critical piece that occurred during the construction of the Tang Science Annex is that we paired the construction with about $1 million worth of restoration of the historic building. Of course, the historic building is kind of our bread and butter, right? It's what folks come to visit when they come to the Fairbanks Museum. So in addition to, we received in 2019 a National Park Services Save America's Treasures grant, which was entirely premised on climate change. We have 130 years of weather data, and the data is very clear that the most significant impact that we're going to have in the short term for our climate are significant precipitation in shorter durations. We knew that in 2019, and it's unfortunately it's really proved true in the last couple of years. So in that grant application, what we stated was what we need to harden this building to climate change that's going to happen in our location is a really comprehensive drain system around the historic building. So that was funded. And what that translated into was we went around the entire historic building, excavated down to the bottom of the foundation, repointed the entire below ground stone foundation, sprayed it all with spray foam, a vapor barrier on top of that, and then a sheet drain on top of the vapor barrier, put in a perimeter drain around the entire building that was gravity drains into our parking lot, into a swale. And then gravel infill, and then a 5-foot EPDM skirt around the entire thing to really try and push water away from the building. And you know, as I'm sure many of you know, all of you know, St. Johnsbury had an absolutely outrageously catastrophic rainstorm this July with 8 inches of rain, you know, overnight. Our Fairbanks Museum has kept weather records for 130 years. Our previous 24-hour record was 5 inches, and that was in the 19 teens. And then we had 8 inches in 5 hours. And, you know, catastrophic flooding all over the place in St. Johnsbury, Lyndonville, you know, towns all around. And our building functioned as it, you know, the drain functioned as we had hoped it would. In a way that I can't even tell you how much it probably saved us in insurance claims and all that kind of stuff. And just being able to operate, like to get 8 inches of rain and not have a building, which is always, you know, a basement that's always historically been wet for 100 years. So here's just a quick chart to show you kind of just the sum total of what this has meant in just the pure cost of electricity for us, you know, as all of those installations rolled out. So in 2013, we're spending over $18,000 in electricity bills, and then you see the different solar installations get added. Then we added buildings to the campus. We repowered buildings with heat pumps. So, you know, we're in a little bit of a war of attrition here in terms of generating more electricity through solar, but then also using more electricity because we're repowering things with, you know, ground and air source heat pumps. But so far, it has definitely paid off. You know, at face value, we've saved at least 70-some thousand dollars, and that number I'm sure is much larger than that because it doesn't account for a couple of buildings and the amount that we're now not spending on fuel oil, et cetera. So there's a lot of savings that are built into that. And just lastly, just kind of a follow-up slide on one of the second one that I showed you, which is to say, you know, what all of these installations have translated into and buildings are a much financially stronger institution. So we went from, you know, net assets of like $3 to $4 million 10 years ago to now $15 million, much higher admissions to the museum, ability to, you know, hire and hold on to staff, change out exhibits. So you're seeing the, you know, the effect of all of these installations, cost savings, and new spaces, you know, for us as one of the anchor institutions in St. Johnsbury and really the, you know, a critical anchor tourist destination in St. Johnsbury, really translates into a lot of people visiting this location because we can provide staff for them to have, you know, a good visit and an interesting program, have new exhibits for folks to see. So that's, you know, visitation to this part of the world, and then that translates into folks, you know, shopping, eating in this area. So, you know, there's a pretty direct through line from what we've done here with this climate piece and resilience, trying to build up St. Johnsbury's downtown to be you know, just an attractive, vibrant place. So, and there are a lot of, I should say, there are a lot of other institutions that are helping us do that. This is, for us, has been, you know, one of the critical ways we've helped to do that. So the last thing I'll just really quickly talk about are just a few of the challenges that happened as we, you know, pulled off all of this. As I mentioned, kind of early on, we don't have a lot of money, so funding was always a challenge. What I've presented to you are the grants that came through. There are an equal number or more of grants and monies from private foundations, et cetera, that didn't come through. So there's like, a tremendous amount of resources were spent in just trying to figure out how to pay for all this and make that work. That was a huge challenge, a lot of hustle, over 10 years of just hustling at every point to make it happen. I would say permitting has been, kind of a challenge for us. I personally permitted one of these installations, and it was as like a layperson, it was pretty hard. Like to get something through the Public Utility Commission was tough. So yeah, I think that's kind of the sum total of it.
Great. Questions from the committee?
Okay. So it's a fantastic project. And I really appreciate your presenting it, Adam. I guess the first question that occurs to me is actually on your last chart, showing a decline in looks like a decline in revenue, I think, this past year, and wondering if that's just what you can say about that.
For sure, I can tell you exactly what that means. So that's not a decline in revenue. That is, so you'll see that our investments climb up, in 2022 and 2023, as we are in the middle of a capital campaign for the Science Annex. So we're basically, making asks and grant applications and all that kind of stuff, and the money is coming in, and we're stocking it away, and then we spent it with wild abandon. The building. So yeah, so that's just, that's a natural outcome of honestly not having like we don't have a huge amount of money to do anything. So we've got to raise it. So that's what you see. The money goes up and then we spend it.
Yeah, I see. Makes sense. Great. So the project is entirely complete now and open to the public. And anything you can say about the experience with the building, what people say, indoor air quality, comfort?
All high marks on all of those. So we have we put in a really robust series of hands-on STEM exhibits, which have been really very popular. So those have helped us because the Fairbanks Museum, the Historic Museum is kind of a look but don't touch natural history cabinet of curiosities museum. So the Science Annex was designed to pair that with hands-on STEM exhibits. So that's been really very popular. And we had by far our best admission year last year that the institution has ever had in its history. So,
yeah.
So that's
very positive. I was wondering if people are reacting to the well, as I say, the air quality, the comfort in the annex. I'm sure the main building is also better now, but the annex, I would think would be, would be noticeably not better, but just yeah.
100%. So it is. I mean, it is. In the in the summertime, that space is air conditioned, so it is cool all the time. And that said, it's open to the Historic Museum, which does not have any climate control. So it has helped pull down the humidity in that side of the building, which is important to us from not just the visitor comfort point of view, that's important, but also.
Sorry, the last thing you said just got blanked out there. Could you say that again?
Yeah, it's just so you're pulling down the humidity and the temperature in the historic building is important for both visitor comfort and the preservation of all of our historic collections.
Sure. Well, did you upgrade the HVAC in the main building also, the historic building? At the same time?
There's no HVAC system in the historic building.
No HVAC system. It's historic.
Did
I have to tell you, it's like the big project that I want to get done next is to have climate control in the historic building. 25,000 stone and masonry building, and I haven't found any contractors yet that can help us do that. Like it's just so complicated. There's no walls to run piping through. It's going to be really a challenge. I don't know how.
So that the building has no insulation space. It's just solid stone, right? The walls.
It's actually, believe it or not, the Fairbanks Museum is mostly a brick building, which you see is stone. But it's mostly brick.
But is it solid masonry then, but no cavities?
It's
Cavities, I mean.
one layer of brick with a layer of air and another layer of brick, and then 6 to 8 inches of stone.
Okay. Interesting. Thanks.
Did you, in these 4 old buildings, did you run into any of asbestos, vermiculite, lead paint?
Yes. So they all have, I shouldn't say all. So we've had to remediate asbestos in most of our buildings. For the science annex, in work in the historic building, I think we spent somewhere in the order of $30,000 to remediate asbestos, which was out around insulation, around pipes, and then we had some zoonite, which is like the powdered asbestos in the used as insulation in one of the air pockets in the building. So yeah, so it's been asbestos and everything, a little bit of PCBs and some of the caulk here and there, lead paint everywhere. I mean, everything has. So yeah.
Victoria.
Thank you. I'm very excited to visit. It's been a while. And these are just tremendous investments. And I was excited to hear that it's a campus now for CCV.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we are, the St. Johnsbury site for CCV is here. Yeah.
That's amazing. I had a question about the mass timber. Was it produced in Vermont or?
No. Well, here's something to work on. So as a demonstration project, we just don't have the mass timber facilities not only in Vermont, in New England. So those eastern hemlock trees were from southern Vermont and southern New Hampshire. They were, grown here, kiln dried in Vermont, and then we had to ship them to Alabama to have them laid up into CLT and then, cut into the exact pieces that we needed and then sent back here. And so that was possible because it was a demonstration project and there was grant funding to do that. But it's absolutely an issue that, you have these resources which can't at this point be turned into, cross-laminated timber here. And there are a lot of folks working on that, I should say, the University of Maine and.
Where did you ship them to?
Did you say Alabama?
All right. Yeah, okay.
What is the total investment for all the upgrades and the addition?
I'd say we're at about probably 9 million. Give or take.
That's not including the solar.
No, that includes the solar.
It does.
Yeah, well, the Tang Science Annex and restoration, that project was about 8 million, and everything else is probably another million, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe like 1.2 or 3. Sure, it's under 10. It's under 10 million.
All right. Great. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Get up and take a visit. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna take a field trip.
Stay home that morning.
Thank you.
Wish I knew about that hemlock, because they could have harvested all a bunch off them.
Yeah.
Elmer's glue. All right.
All right, we have our next witness.
Yes.
You ready for me?
We are.
Got hard copies of the presentation as well.
No computer audio. I was watching the sort of house and stuff. So good.
Anybody want a hard copy?
So there are several new slides starting on page 15, supplemental to be responsive to the questions you asked me last week. Right. And so otherwise, you do have the rest of the slides.
Thanks. Let's see, TJ, we've already introduced ourselves. I'll have you introduce yourself for the record when you're ready. And then for our planning purposes, how long do you think your presentation might last, assuming we had no questions?
10 minutes.
Yeah. Coming back
Which
next
is
week.
not gonna happen.
No questions. I would say 45 minutes to an hour, but with questions, you could almost double that, probably.
We're good at that. So, do you guys want to shoot for 11:30? Ish? Does that sound okay? Because we do need to talk a little bit about the budget and get organized for our budget memo. I just want to make sure we find some time today to, to do that. So, okay. So if all goes well, and I'm not gonna, we don't need to cut anybody off, but we do want to wrap up by noon for sure. So if things go roughly according to plan, we'll try to get you out of here around 11:30 and see if before lunch we can talk a little bit about our budget tasks.
That sounds great to me.
Okay, so let's have some of the folks who've joined us identify themselves for the record.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Dowds with Renewable Energy Vermont.
Great, thank you.
You don't actually have to if I don't want to speak, but I'm Thomas Weiss. I've been following the clean heat standard since the beginning, and before that, I've been commenting. I was a participant in the clean heat standard in the beginning, proceedings, and before that, I've been involved in various energy issues coming before this committee and its predecessors.
Thank you.
Allison, it's Patty Danville, Vermont resident.
Great, thanks. Okay, for the record.
TJ Poor, Department of Public Service, Director of Regulated Utility Planning. And thank you for having me back. I'm going to start on slide 14 of the presentation, which should also be posted to your website. This slide you did see yesterday, and this and some of the, or not yesterday, last week, this and some of the preceding slides caused a lot of questions and good questions. So starting with a follow-up here. And so just as a refresher, this was a projection of the renewable energy standard cost from 2025 to 2034. These are ratepayer costs, and the projection was for annual average 6 to 8% rate impact going forward. And I want to the questions you asked last time were related to, well, what did it cost in the past? And then what are we getting for that cost, which are really relevant questions, and I appreciate them. So in the past, this is what distribution utilities reported to us from 2017 to 2023 for costs of the renewable energy standard. And you can see that in 2017, when it first started and requirements were low, it was about $5 million, and gradually increasing to in 2023 to about $32 million. The green portion of that are the tier 3 costs. Those are gross costs. So the cost for the incentives, the rebates that utilities are giving for electric vehicles or heat pumps. It does not include kind of the many years forward of load impacts. And that means both the revenues that come in and net revenues above, you get 20 cents a kilowatt hour for every kilowatt hour sold. And then they pay, let's just say this isn't a number, about 10 cents to serve that kilowatt hour. That increment is kind of a benefit that actually reduces rate pressure. And if I back up a slide, that's shown in the future as those negative green bars going down there. And so it's over time, once those cumulative kilowatt hours come into effect, that's a net benefit of tier 3. That is also, so it assumes no infrastructure upgrades necessary to support that. So no substations needed, no other investments to avoid a substation, right, needed to serve that load. Right?
Rep. Southworth?
Can you explain the spike on that previous slide? The spikes in 2030 and 2032.
Sure. 2030 specifically is when the 100% res requirement, so the tier one pops up to 100% for both GMP and Vermont Electric Co-op. So that's a big new requirement in that year. 2032, I believe, is just related to the increase in tier two requirements in that year. Tier two and tier four, they kind of gradually go up by year. They continue to go up slowly after 2032, but it's related to the increasing requirements and in combination with the forecasted price for those renewable energy credits.
Would that increase or correlate to an increase in rates?
Upward rate pressure, yes. Yep. Okay. And so it is, I just want to be clear, it's the combination of the increase in requirement and the projected price of procuring that new renewable energy, which is really related to the modeling work that was done last year for the renewable energy standard through a technical stakeholder advisory group process, which lots of stakeholders participated in, and you'll see some of the results of it.
And does the modeling at this point stop at 2034?
For the cost of the res, yes, that's what we have an explicit ask to model those costs in the statute that's referenced there, and every year, and so that's what this chart is showing. When we look at the cost of a resource, we are looking at the whole lifetime of the resource.
I was just wondering what happens after, if that's when the modeling ends, or what happens after 2034. So we haven't looked out that far.
Not in this model. When we see I'll show you a slide with some of the modeling that was done last year on kind of what the total impacts are, and that shows a 20-year look. It's out. It's the value of the resource, the net benefits and costs of the resource for the life of the resource, and then installed each year. So,
Rep. Tort?
I was just wondering how, like, the IRP for GMP would affect this, or how is the timing of the IRP signals relate to when the rest update?
IRPs are every 3 years, and integrated resource plans are every 3 years. The timing of the submittal doesn't necessarily line up. That utilities have them. They're kind of staggered over the 3 years. So we're always in an IRP process for some utility, and the utilities, prior to updates to the renewable energy standard, there had been conversations about a renewable energy standard, and to understand the variables that are going to affect utility costs, utilities were wise to, in their decision-making framework, stress what the requirements would be in the future. And so Green Mountain Power, for instance, just submitted its integrated resource plan. They didn't, because the renewable energy standard was just passed, they didn't necessarily stress that, but they incorporated the new requirements into its integrated resource plan. Those were the historic. Okay, so what do you get from that? So the biggest benefit here from the res societally is the carbon savings, and I think that was one of the things that you all asked about last time. So this chart shows, compared to 2016's portfolio, so prior to when we had a renewable energy standard, the amount of tons of carbon equivalent, we use carbon equivalent because the tier 3 savings are fossil fuel reductions, and they're translated to carbon equivalent. carbon equivalent savings in each year. And so about 600,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent been saved in 2017, up to over 700,000. This compared that 2016 mix was around 50% non-emitting previously with Hydro-Quebec contracts, nuclear contracts, other hydro resources in the state. And so you think about it as that's the difference between 50, being 50% non-emitting to where we are now after the renewable energy standard. What does that mean monetarily, or how do we monetize that value? Generally, what's used to monetize the value is social cost of carbon. And what that is, I have the definition here for you for reference in the future, but it's really an estimate of the damages caused by greenhouse gas emissions and measured in tons of carbon dioxide. And that the measure of damages caused by them equates to the benefits of reducing carbon emissions by the same amount in a year. So it's $1 per ton value. That in Vermont, the Climate Council has adopted the social cost of carbon, which is based on Environmental Protection Agency estimates. And so I should note that those estimates have changed over time. For years, we actually just used what was called a marginal abatement cost, like what you stacked up all the measures necessary to hold climate change to 2 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees warming Celsius, what past intergovernmental panel on climate change scientists recommended what we hold it to. Stack up all the measures that could get there, from efficiency to renewable natural gas to carbon capture, and that last measure of potential that kind of meets the target, whatever that cost, was the value that we used, and that was about $100 a ton of carbon. And so for about a decade, Vermont used $100 a ton value. Switching to the social cost of carbon, ended up changing that to $128 a ton of carbon. And then recently, in the past year, that has then since been updated again. And it's a stream of values, but I'll say it's roughly $200 a ton of carbon now. I will say that this can be political. So tying it to the EPA can cause some changes in the social cost of carbon. When the first Trump administration was in office, they actually dropped the social cost of carbon down significantly. One of the big components of that is that of the social cost of carbon is the discount rate, how you value the future relative to the present. And that Trump administration said, oh, we're going to have a big discount rate. We value the present much more than the future. The Biden administration went back to closer to what the Obama administration had, and had a much lower discount rate, valuing the future a little more. So you see some ups and downs there, but ultimately the Climate Council right now has been making a recommendation and adopting it. And that's what the department has been using for the last many years. It's in the Comprehensive Energy Plan to value greenhouse gas emissions. So
yeah, Rep. Clifton.
And is it fair to say that the social cost, the harm done by a ton of CO2 emissions in Vermont, that harm of the Vermont emissions, there's some small part of that harms Vermont directly in terms of air pollution, health effects, and all that, but most of the harm is done globally. So and similarly, the benefit to reducing is spread globally, and similarly, Vermont benefits from other people's reductions and is hurt by other people's increases. Is that all conceptually fair?
Yeah, I think so. That basically this is a global measure, and so it's that you're avoiding damages of $200 a ton of carbon. If we reduce a ton of carbon, the benefits of that, in one way to think of it is, well, it's proportionally population weighted, right? We're like 0.00008% of the world's population. Well, that percent of the social cost of carbon would be a benefit to Vermont. Your point of other entities reducing their carbon or increasing their carbon, we're similarly affected the same way. So yes, I think what you said is accurate.
Yeah, Rectoria Stickler.
Question. Do any other states use the value of what's it called? The statistical value of a life? The impacts on mortality? Is that ever part of the calculus?
I have seen that value before. I'm not, I can't give you a confident answer on how other states use that. I think
We don't.
Vermont has not used that in its energy policy.
Oh, look.
Yeah.
Do you know if the damage, the National Academy of Sciences definition, damages include flooding and all that stuff. Does it include health and mortality? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I would need to circle back and check. I will say I'm not an expert on the details like that of the social cost of carbon. But I do think there are some health benefits included in there, but I would need to do some research to find that answer.
Rick Campbell.
Yeah, I guess this leads me to wonder about who's responsible for reducing our pollution, and the social cost of carbon and how that relates to global greenhouse gas emissions and all of that seems very abstract. I think probably very abstract to individual households buying fuel. But how does it relate to our responsibility as people to address our reducing our pollution, our contribution to pollution? Is the social cost of carbon really that number, or is there any other way of looking at it? I'm not sure I came prepared to answer that social question. Like what's our obligation? The balancing of different, right? If you're kind of talking about our moral obligation to reduce pollution, it's our moral obligation to take responsibility for our own. And so there's a number there, but and maybe social cost of carbon is as good a proxy as any. But yeah, there has to be. It's greater than zero. We know that.
Yes, agree.
Google's AI engine says that the National Academy of Sciences social cost of carbon does incorporate health and mortality effects.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now if you took 2 slides ago, I had the 600,000 tons increasing to 750,000 tons. This slide multiplies the social cost of carbon by those tons of savings. So this is the renewable energy standard social dollar impacts. So 2017, you're at $120 million. And up to about $160 million. And that is, if you recall, in 2017, our renewable energy standard was $5 million of Vermont costs, increasing to $32 million in 2023. So that's the ratio. I probably could put both of those things on the same chart, but from 2017 to 2019, those are estimates based on the updated social cost of carbon. So it was updated and it started in 2020. So I kind of just back cast that value backwards. as opposed to going back to the old value where we just see a big jump in the dollar amount. And so this really gets to the question that I teed up the first time, I think, how much, and maybe what you were alluding to, Representative Campbell, of how much do Vermonters pay for this benefit, which is clearly substantial, no matter what social cost of carbon you use. I do want to remind you all, I didn't put a chart in here because I think you've seen it all many times. Electric sector emissions are about 2.5% of Vermont's total emissions. So on the scale of what we need to address in Vermont, the electric emissions are small and declining given our current policy now. Okay, I wanted to show a couple of slides that were showed the difference between the kind of the societal benefit and the ratepayer benefit, or I should say societal impact, and to include both costs and benefits, both societally and from a ratepayer perspective. This slide and the next one come from the modeling that the department contracted for by Sustainable Energy Advantage. It was vetted through a stakeholder advisory group. We had 6 working group meetings with participants, stakeholders. We invited regional planning representatives from regional planning commissions, the general public, for those who weren't participating as a portion of their regular work, we paid for their participation so that we could get a wide array of participants here. And so, and this is when we were looking at a number of different scenarios of what a new renewable energy standard could be. So the increment from what we had to what we could propose. None of these scenarios, so there's 6 scenarios here, none of these scenarios exactly equate to what was passed. And so really these 2 slides are illustrative of the societal the societal framework and a ratepayer Vermont framework. Now, I want to draw your attention to the benefits lines on this slide. You can see that in every scenario, the benefits were greater than the cost in the societal perspective when you look at it societally. The 2,
So you keep talking about societal benefits and the costs and the advantages, but it's not a tangible amount that somebody sees, correct?
That's right. Yes, that's it.
Well, how do you define price suppression here? That would be.
Yep. Good question. I'm going to talk about that in a second.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So that's what. Oh.
Did you have anything?
Thank you.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sure we'll be on this slide for a minute.
Yes. So in drawing your attention to the benefits columns, you can see they're big. The top kind of tealish color, it's teal up there too, is greenhouse gas benefits. And so that's the social cost of carbon. This model was done before the EPA and the updated and the Climate Council adopted the increased social cost of carbon. So this teal portion on the top would be bigger with the bigger social cost of carbon. But the point is the same that I'm going to talk about. Price, and then the rest of these lines are all other benefits that are counted in the modeling, and they're over time. And so price suppression, you see, is the next biggest one. And what that is when we have reductions in load, which solar in state or solar participating in the marketplace looks like reductions in load, that actually lowers those wholesale market prices, clearing prices that everybody is paid. You remember I talked about those wholesale energy market prices one of the previous times I was in here. The way those work is if we need, I'll just say, a gigawatt of demand, then generators or supply entities come in and say, well, I'll supply that demand for for $20 a megawatt hour, or I'll supply 100 megawatts of that demand for $20 a megawatt hour. The next generator will say, well, I'll supply 100 megawatts for $40 a megawatt hour. And once you stack up the supply, you get enough supply at the lowest price to actually meet the demand. That's the market clearing price, and everybody gets paid that price. When resources that have no fuel costs enter the market, they often bid in and say, hey, I will supply that. I'll supply that demand. I'll meet that demand for $0 a megawatt hour because I have contracts with a utility, or I have other ways to make my money, and I'm happy to just take that market clearing price, whatever it is. And so that $0 bid kind of pushes out the highest price bid that otherwise would have been there. And that lowers the market clearing price, or in other words, it suppresses the price, and it's price suppression. Now that happens regionally. We're in a regional marketplace. 95% off the top, 95% of that regional price suppression accrues to the rest of New England, not to Vermont. And that's just because that's our share of the region. Now, even a portion of that 5%, because you recall, Vermont utilities are very hedged, as I talked about one of the other times, like 85 to 95% hedged in the long term, even more in the short term. But that mitigates the price suppression impact for Vermonters because utilities have already secured that supply. And so that price suppression impact is largely a societal benefit and not so much a ratepayer benefit, which we'll see on the next slide, the comparison. I do want to talk about a couple of these other items. Reduced line losses are a value that is captured here. There are transmission and distribution benefits, avoiding some transmission cost, avoiding some distribution costs. Included in that is when a generator interconnects in Vermont, then they often have to upgrade some of the line, and a portion of that is assumed as a benefit to Vermont ratepayers in this analysis. There are capacity benefits, and then the red bars are what are we paying for it. And I'm going to switch to the next slide, and you can see, so this is the societal impacts. The next slide it's the rate impact measure test here, the RIM test, but think of this as like the Vermont impacts. And so you see the costs aren't changing at all. The benefits, you see there are price suppression benefits in here. You don't see much of the greenhouse gas benefits. You still see capacity benefits, distribution benefits, and those are on top of the regular energy benefits. When you say incremental cost of renewable energy, that's the incremental energy cost above what it would otherwise cost to buy energy.
Super high level. Is it accurate to say, and you don't need to go back to it, but the previous slide is trying to capture the costs and benefits in a big picture way, and this slide is focusing in only on rates?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
thanks.
Yep. So I'll flip back and forth a couple of times because it's a big difference. And I think I'll say it again, I guess. It's what Vermonters are, what are Vermonters paying to, and what are for these societal impacts. Because if we were just paying for ratepayer impacts, that's a different question. Then do we want to look at it globally or big picture? And so that's the balance that we need to strike, right?
Yeah.
So am I interpreting this correct on the next slide that the costs keep increasing to Vermonters?
No, so this is not over time, this chart. These are just a number of scenarios that were analyzed.
The costs are increasing for Vermonters by those scenarios.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
And this is the scenario compared to the business as usual and as I said before, none of these scenarios are exact to what actually got passed.
So for the bars that are the lowest, the smallest increases, what's the common theme? What's the driver
Lower,
that lowers them?
lower targets. So you could see,
Is that more the target and not the nuclear?
yes, it is more, although the nuclear, makes an impact, a significant impact as well. So, right now, this is probably dangerous. So subject to check on the numbers, we get that, nuclear contracts, what's embedded in our system are about 1 million megawatt hours every year, right? That we already have entitlements to. Purchasing renewable energy credits to cover those, at $4 a megawatt hour, for example, would be $4 million a year of cost. And
Entitlements. Is that a word? Like, what does that have
Yeah.
a name?
Yes.
I've heard that before.
I mentioned it a couple times ago because I like to use that word because it's I use it to represent either contracts or ownership rights of the utilities to a particular resource. So they are entitled to the products from that resource.
What is the relationship of that word to a long-term power purchasing agreement? Like, are they, does that mean the same thing?
That a long-term
Or
power
power
purchase
purchasing
agreement
agreement.
would be a type of entitlement, but they also own resources as well, so they're entitled to that stuff. Okay, so that was the answering the questions from.
I know, we haven't even started the new stuff.
Not done. So these scenarios, I'm trying to puzzle out these different scenarios and how they relate to where we're at now with the current, the res was passed last year.
Oops. I'm trying to move the R here. So scenario 5 is that first column is short for regional tier target. That says 30%. We're at 20% for some utilities and 15 or 10% for other utilities in the state. The tier 2 target, we could go up to 20%, although there are some exemptions that weren't modeled here that ultimately made it into the new law, like older municipal hydro units that were low impact hydro certified are eligible for tier 2. That's not modeled here. So, something lower than scenario 5 in terms of cost, but benefits would also go down proportionally as well.
So scenario 5 is represents the bills from last year.
No. So you just to how it relates, if you think of scenario 5, the bill from last year was close to 20% regional, 20% tier 2 with certain exemptions, and certain utilities did not have to go to that level. And those exemptions and carve outs for utilities are not reflected here. Plus it was 20% instead of 30%. So I was just trying to compare them for you, but none of these are what passed. Correct.
Oh,
That seems like that would be useful.
Rep. Klepner.
So, the net cost to Vermonters translates into that 6 to 8% rates higher than they would have been without the res. Is that?
The 6 to, yes, that's correct.
And, the price suppression. So the gray bar on the previous look price suppression across the ISO New England region, which means we do stuff that contributes to price suppression. And that's the total total value to all ratepayers across New England, and our part of that is our 5%. Like Vermont's rates come down, but only by 5% of that great bar. Is that accurate?
Correct. Lessened by the amount that utilities are already hedged long-term.
Mm.
As they enter new contracts, it does help, but the value is kind of drawn out and spread. But yes, yeah.
Representative Morrow.
No, something that got me a little more confused, actually. So like the benefit to a utility of having X kilowatts of megawatts of solar in state means they don't have to go out in the spot market and buy it, or from Hydro-Quebec or anywhere. They have this entitlement.
Yes.
Which provides a benefit. You have some of the benefits, but it also provides a long-term stability benefit, right? In terms of we're not, like a couple of years ago during the Ukraine crisis, natural gas prices spiked tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
But because we were locked into long-term contracts, that impact was much less for us than other states that had to buy energy in the spot market. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. And so the solar part of this contributes to that in a whatever the proportional rate is.
Yes.
But it's not factored into anything we're looking at here.
So the long-term value of solar, of having a contract, was I don't believe, I'll check and circle back if I'm not right, but I don't believe that was included. I do want to skip ahead to a slide because I have a picture that could be helpful here. So apologies for the fast clicking here, but I went too far. There we go. Okay, so if you can see that small chart on the bottom left here, apologies for all the text on this slide. This is a scenario. This is a variant of the scenario, so it's even closer to what actually got modeled. But you can see the surplus or deficit as a percent of forecasted load in a month in the year 2035. And so as a result of the after the new renewable energy standard take effect, we are close to, in May, we're 40%, we have 40% more energy we're entitled to from the long-term contracts, from solar to everything else we already have contracted for, 40% more than we need in May. And in September, we're 50% less than we already need. And so that variance kind of also creates risk, right? So if we're overhedged or underhedged, you're still kind of subject to those market prices in that manner. And so this is one of the things that it creates new challenges, also creates opportunities, but it creates challenges to manage that surplus and deficit as we go forward. So yes to the answer to your question of is there value to the solar to long-term contracts in order to hedge some of those market? Yes. I don't believe they were explicitly included in that cost, but it's not just like you automatically get value because it creates other challenges as well.
Okay, that's helpful.
Spin through a bunch of slides really quick again to get back to the next section here, or
Just one last,
Okay.
yeah, one last question on the previous.
the one that I was just showing.
No, before you. Just in terms of rates, because we heard from GMP, for example, about their distributed battery program. So do we understand resilience benefits and the impact on rates? And is that something you were able to model?
So, storage is different than the renewable energy standard, first of all. There's no innate resilience benefits unless like the generation assets are managed appropriately, right? And so there's costs associated with doing that. So we did not assume like the management of the generation assets with another cost, because that would have been another version of modeling, and it wasn't kind of the question at hand. There was a proceeding. So GMP files for tariffs for their storage projects, and we'll show some results of that to the extent we have time, where what's in the state now. And when they do a benefit cost analysis. The resilience value is not modeled. It's something we've been asking them to model. It's a hard question to answer nationally. I think we're actually on the forefront of asking that question. Today on Friday, we'll be submitting a petition to the Public Utility Commission to open a proceeding in resilience to have real in-depth discussions on how to value resilience, how to measure it, how to track it, what targets we should have, how do we encourage our utilities to do it? Is it different for investor-owned utilities versus co-ops versus munis, et cetera? And we have Lawrence Berkeley Labs is actually helping with scoping that in terms of so we can help understand the best practice there.
Great.
That was a good question, and it saved me some time on a later slide. So
Great.
Onward.
Okay.
Great. Representative Campbell, can you?
Sure.
Be
I
in
have
charge.
to plug out here in about 5 to 10
I'll be
minutes.
back in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay, so I have been aware that you have had folks in to talk about the standard offer program and net metering. So really, I'm not going to go over the the mechanics of those two programs and just kind of show a couple slides on the results of where we are, how much distributed generation we have. The chart on the left kind of shows where the projects have been located from the standard offer program and different types. Solar is yellow, and they're kind of the size. There's a little size guide up there as well. Red is farm methane. A lot of those are older projects that are in the standard offer program. And there's some hydro projects that have qualified, especially down in the southern part of the state. This chart shows kind of what the capacity by year has been, mostly solar, clearly, all the yellow on the chart. We do still have about 30 megawatts of program capacity pending under contract in the queue to be built, I guess, or get certificates of public good. We have in the recent years had some projects drop out since a lot of projects I won't say a lot. We've had projects bid in that at a price where they ultimately decide they can't build it at that price. And so there's reserve units that are selected to kind of fill the gap. And then ultimately, if they can't make it, then the commission would have to do a new solicitation.
Okay. Peter, can I ask you about the wind projects? So Lowell is owned by GMP, so that wouldn't be in here. But what about Sheffield?
Those are part of the SPEED program.
Oh, okay.
So those were built, and the standard offer is 2.2 megawatts is the highest, the lowest capacity.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure if this was mentioned before. There's a component of the standard offer program that is for the Rygate facility. That's a 20 megawatt biomass facility. They have a fixed price contract through 2032. Recently, the legislature passed requirements for that plant to increase its efficiency, basically use the waste heat from its plant, and they have some milestones to do that over the next couple of years. And if they don't meet those milestones, then they would be subject to the contract going away.
At which point they would be selling their power on the market.
Correct. If they choose to continue to operate. Switching to the net metering program, again, I'm not gonna go over the basics of this. If you have time or you have questions later, there's slides here on how kind of it works and what the rates are here for excess generation. Basically, if you offset consumption in a month in your on-site, in your bill, you get the retail rate. If you are exporting to the grid, you get the rates that are on this. They depend on the size of your facility and whether you transfer the renewable energy credits to the utility or not.
That slide, and is this what we read on the website of net metering 1.0 through 2.6 revisions of?
Right. I'm not sure which website you're referring to, but the net metering 1.0 was the version of the program that was in existence.
I found it. 2.6 is today, 7/1/24. All right.
Okay.
I found the correlation of what I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. How much deployment this is really what I wanted to get to. What has our net metering program gotten us? About 375 megawatts of distributed generation. That is, again, our peak load is about 900 megawatts, plus or minus in a given year. And so we're talking 45% of our peak capacity. And that is, in the top of nationwide, but a percent of our peak demand being met by distributed generation resources and net metering, or just net metering in this slide. I'm gonna skip through that one. This really combines standard offer and net metering and all of our distributed generation installations by technology. It also includes battery storage on this chart. So you can see in total, we have 545 megawatts of solar. So again, on that 900 megawatt peak, we're talking 60% of our peak load, which is, outside of Hawaii and California, I think is best of the country. And so we have other distributed generation resources that are described here on the slide. And you can see how it's increased over time. Right? I don't want to spend too much time on this.
However,
One quick one. So do you not consider efficiency a DER?
Passive efficiency is not considered DER here. Active efficiency, so like demand resources or flexible load resources, that would be. I have a slide talking about that, but it's not on this slide.
Rick Howland.
So if solar is generating, that's the sum of the solar generation. And my concern is that the batteries at the sum of solar peak, the batteries are not contributing, but if the solar drops out, then the batteries come in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or noon to shave the peak. I think my question is, they're double accounting here of the energy, because we both understand that the solar peak doesn't occur every 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. But the storage can be drawn on in the absence of solar being the peak. So it's a daily average. That basically is what we're presenting here. So I question, if you understand my question, is that when solar isn't producing on Wednesday what it produced on Tuesday, so the battery is being drawn on Wednesday, are they both included in this bar chart simultaneously?
So this bar chart is really just the amount of total capacity we have. So it's not reflective of the generation on any one peak here. And so it's just, this is how much is out there. I will say our peak has moved to later in the day. So there's probably not going to be 545 megawatts of solar on, generating at the peak. And so maybe I will take that and maybe think about how to present this slide in the future, because I can see that confusion. I will say that solar, especially the first, couple hundred megawatts that we had, did help move the peak into the evening hours and so and that type of value is reflected in the analysis that I showed you, at least the going forward analysis. And so but this is really just the capacity that we have, and as a percent of our last peak is a good reference value. It's not saying that, it's much longer. If that makes sense.
I think I understand.
Great.
For failing.
So we do all this stuff and this to me looks like it's great stuff. And how do we get these lower rates to consumers? This, all we hear is price suppression, but I never hear that if Vermonters are doing all these great things, how come we never get any rate reductions from our utilities?
Well, so right now we're just there's a lot of reasons. There's upward pressure on rates, right? We've been talking about the renewable energy standard, which we have reported our estimates of 3.5% in 2023 and an annual average of 6 to 8% going forward as a part of rates. Right now, these resources are more expensive to Vermont ratepayers than the alternative to just buy, a long-term contract in the marketplace. And so that's what we're paying for. We get some of the benefits that I've described here in Vermont, and then we get some of the societal or global benefits. So the renewable programs don't necessarily have downward pressure on rates. There are other costs that we aren't talking about here in terms of storm costs or just inflationary pressures on utilities, healthcare costs, right? Or labor costs. Those don't go down ever. And so that's why we're not seeing reductions in rates. And utilities for their part, I guess occasionally for Green Mountain Power, they have power supply adjuster mechanism, and occasionally in a quarter or a half a year, you'll see a component of that rate go down slightly. It may not be noticeable in your bill, but then you see it go up if those quarterly costs happen to go up as well. So I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question fully, but there's a lot that goes into rates, and the renewable energy standard has not been putting downward pressure on rates. It puts upward pressure on rates, but today I added into the slides and what some of those benefits are that we do get.
Yeah, how are we doing slide wise? Just to get a little check.
Let me see. Pretty good.
Okay, good.
A bunch of these are appendices, so like 10 more slides, basically.
Great. No, we're doing great. Rep Sebelia?
Where would be, and I don't know that we've ever seen this type of a presentation, but going to rates and Rep Bailey's question. So we know that global climate change is creating much stronger storms. I've seen presentations from utilities about a significant increase in hurricane winds, the damage that is doing to the lines and poles, the need to rebuild. They're not and move lines underground and other. So the cost of hardening infrastructure as a result of global climate change, which of course we can't stop here in Vermont. Where would be the best place for us to see the impact that that is having on rates?
Um, there's, I think a couple of places. One, I think the utilities would be best positioned to talk about exactly what those investments have been to harden and to their lines and what that impact is on rates. In Green Mountain Power's integrated resource plan, they have an investment path for resilience and hardening. That's subject to their a new multi-year rate plan, which will happen next year. And you need to go through the commission process. I want to be clear, though, that I think we make all these investments, and similarly how these investments we make have a societal impact and benefit of reducing damages associated with climate change, and a portion of that comes from Vermont. I think to Representative Klebner's point is that the increased global emissions over time are going to continue to cause the need for storm hardening. And so the investments we're making here, they may pay off for Vermonters like 40 or 50 or 60 years from now in terms of like the reduction in carbon, but they're not, those hardening measures are going to happen now either way. And these investments will, they'll help down the line. And that's part of valuing the social cost of carbon, but it is not, they're not going to see reductions in rates because of it immediately.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it has an increase pressure
Right.
on rates.
The hardening,
right now.
yes, yeah. Yes.
So I mean, we've seen significant hardening projects in our neck of the woods. Previous to that, the power would go out the first strong wind, and there's a lot of my district that has not. So I'm just, it's a very big conversation that we're having here. And, I think we're all concerned about making sure people can pay their electric bills. And so there's so many factors. And I think it's a great question you asked, what are the things that are impacting rates? What could we see to make them come down?
Rep, we have 3 folks waiting to discuss this very engaging topic. Representative Kleppner, Torrey, Morrow.
Do you have a rough number in your head of how many households have solar on the roof and are net metering, and how many are attached to a remote net metering site?
No. We do have that number. I'm flipping through the slides to see if it's on here. I think there's about roughly 20,000 solar installations, including both the group and or virtual and on site. Most of those are small systems that are on site in terms of the absolute number, although the capacity, obviously you get one bigger one that's 500 kW. That's a number of a lot more smaller ones.
Many houses or whatever it is.
Right.
So let's say, just for fun, 22,000 households taking advantage of net metering at the moment. So 22,000 households out of 170,000 in the state are seeing lower power bills. They're not seeing a reduced rate, but it's netting out to a lower bill.
Correct.
So there's a small slice of Vermonters who have lower bills because of all this. So,
and the rest have a higher bill.
Yeah.
Right.
15%.
The other 85% who aren't participating or using those numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
They're paying the higher price than solar.
Right.
Representative Morrow.
So you might be getting to this and you can move on if you are, but of that 6 to 8%, that's an annual compounded cost over time, right? So it's an annual 6 to 8%.
An annual average. So that's saying in 2023, the rate impact was 3.5%, and in 2034, the rate impact was 10%. Say I don't have the number in front of me, and each year there's a number, and so it's just kind of the average rate impact. So it's not compounded like 6% on top of 6%. It's not that.
Oh, okay. So say this to take 6, so that's 6%. All of that is due to the renewable energy standard, right? That's what we're talking about, right? Of that 6%, like how much of that is because you have to go buy RECs in the market? Or like I'm trying to understand what the
I think all of it.
all of it. Okay, so
That's what the renewable energy standard does, is it has us buy RECs in the marketplace, and that is the kind of above market value of or above market cost of these renewable resources is associated with the RECs. And so it's either going out to the market and buying RECs, or just entering a contract with solar where RECs are kind of priced into the contract price.
right.
Yeah.
We keep talking about global. And I guess it's kind of an open question. Worldwide, how many countries are actually making significant changes to what they're seeing versus what we're trying to do here in Vermont? And if they're not, is there a possibility that we're getting increased pressure on our state to do more?
I don't have specific numbers. I think I like to think that all of the countries that have signed on to the Paris Climate Accord are trying to make progress, and to that's not necessarily the case, right?
Okay, so the Paris Climate Accord is the key factor in this. So we have quite a few countries in the world that aren't doing anything, correct? So that's putting more pressure on the Paris Accord and our state of Vermont to reach certain goals, correct?
I'm
Go ahead, yeah.
Not really.
I'm not, I mean, I think the Paris Climate Accord calls for a global average reduction, and Vermont kind of, as I understand it, and Representative Morrow is right, this isn't necessarily my area, but as I understand it, that Vermont kind of took those numbers and applied it to Vermont. And so it's as if everybody applied those numbers. So if we only, if the United States only does that, then there's variability within the United States of who is trying to make progress towards these goals as well. But if the United States and everybody in the Paris Accord reached the target, I'm not sure if we would meet the global target because of what you're saying. Countries not participating.
I could just add one that I think I don't want to get too far into Paris, but the US has pulled out very recently of Paris, so we're no longer participating in that. And then Iran, Libya, and Yemen are the only other countries so right now it's the United States, Libya, Iran, and Yemen that are not signatories to Paris. Rep. Kleppner?
I'm gonna say my understanding is of the roughly 200 countries who are signatories, roughly half of them are working sort of honestly at reducing emissions. But those 100, I think, are the big polluters. They account for something like 80% of global emissions. So if I'm remembering that all correctly.
Right. So just to be clear, everybody here, I am just trying to find out if there is pressure being put on our state to meet goals, which maybe it isn't equal across the other people.
Yeah, we got to do more.
That's
Kenny's
my
doing less.
question.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay.
Heard. Okay, back to, Rep. Torrey?
I actually have a question about the slide.
Okay.
So this is a really great slide because it kind of shows the trend over time. And we can see that our renewable distributed energy resources are kind of going down. And we can see that our goal is going up since we passed the bill last year. But my question for you is about the mix of how we get there. Because there's different costs associated with that, right? If we see more utility scale versus DER, net meter. And how did that factor into your model?
So each of there were different costs. So as it relates to the modeling, there were different costs for each tier. So tier 2 resources in Vermont had a certain cost with a certain assumption about how much of those would be net metering, which is
Right.
different cost than, and how much would be small scale renewables like standard offer size, and then how much would be big renewables that happen in Vermont that are bigger, that were contracted by utilities or had a different price. So there's a couple of tiers of pricing.
And it'd be
that-
tier 1, those
And
bigger.
well, those were tier 2 resources that all under 5 megawatts. Then we had other prices for the regional tier 4. So new renewable generation from anywhere in New England. And then we had another price for what was expected of tier 1 and what those rec costs would be, because those are all existing resources already. No new resources are going to be tier 1 resources. And so there were different prices associated with that, and tier 1 resources were the cheapest, but they were increasing in cost. You know, I mentioned $4 a megawatt hour. Other states have requirements as well for increasing the amount of existing resources, including for nuclear. And the demand for those existing resources goes up, and so the price then goes up because they're kind of a finite supply. And so those costs then ultimately go up. Ultimately, they're still cheaper than the new resources, but I think part of the intent was to not just rely on these older existing resources, but to develop new renewable energy as well. And that's a trade-off that was made, right? Ultimately, these different mechanisms all produce the same or similar climate benefits, right? Like, a megawatt hour of solar from a net metering is the same as a megawatt hour of solar from the standard offer or a utility PPA, with slight differences in how they're built, et cetera. But this slide here, to your point, just so everybody has the frame of reference here, over time, we see how many resources we've gotten. The lower 2 dashed lines is the previous renewable energy standard tier 2 requirement, the in-state renewable generation. And you can see over time, we were blowing that away on how much we got. And so a lot of these resources are going to be available for meeting this the higher tier. Those 2 top dashed lines are the new renewable energy standard tier. And so we're not there, but there will be resources available to actually comply without necessarily building for at least a few years. And then as it goes forward, as the requirements increase, then new generation will need to be built to meet that. Just because they exist and are on the system doesn't mean they're no cost. Right now, a lot of these resources that you see above the line here are the renewable energy credits are being sold out of state. And so they will no longer be able to sell those renewable energy credits because they'll need them for compliance here. That's part of the cost that's included in the analysis. So,
Rep Bailey?
So again, we're here. I'm trying to get a manufacturing company to come in that wants to hire 100 people. What do I tell that company to say? Why don't you come to Vermont? Because if we need the people, employ them. And basically, utility rates are a big factor for them to come in. So, with all this stuff that's here, what do I do to convince that company to relocate here to Vermont so we can hire people?
well, one thing, one of the early slides I showed a couple of weeks ago was that Vermont's electric rates are the lowest in New England on average. So that's a good story. That's not necessarily related to the renewable energy standard, but that's a good story. They are higher than other parts of the country, and that also is not related to the renewable energy standard. It's related to to other things like our topography and geography and the available resources in New England. We're kind of small geographically compared to other resources, other spots we don't have, 3 gigawatt plants, places. And so, I would say rates are going to go up. We're forecasting, we do, to Rep. Sevilia's point earlier, we do actually have an overall draft forecast we've been working on that's going to show rates increasing over time. A small portion of that is what we're talking about here. A big portion of that is transmission costs regionally are going up. A lot of New England has older transmission that needs to be replaced. Vermont's actually pretty good in that respect, but we still pay a share of that transmission. So I think the story is our rates are stable in Vermont, more stable than other states in New England and in the Northeast, and our rates are on average lower. But like everywhere else, they're going to continue to increase.
Rep. Kleppner?
And, when I'm talking to other businesses, the pitch is pretty similar. It is tough to compete on power rates with places in the South and in the West.
No question.
We just have the higher rate. So if they're looking nationally, you got to hope they like skiing and they want to be here. But within New England, in terms of power, we have low and stable rates, and we're close to some big markets, close to Boston, close to New York. So whatever it is they're making, hopefully low rates and proximity to markets. Plus, it's much more pleasant to live here.
Yeah.
When is that report on projected increases due out?
We don't have a due date. We're kind of still doing like quality control. So,
This year?
yeah, hopefully we have something to publish in the next couple of months, sooner rather than later.
Right, okay. Can you make sure that comes to us?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Rep. Ford?
I just had one other addition for Rep. Bailey, that could be an attractive thing about Vermont. If the company is a B Corp, we have a lot of B Corps in Vermont, and so that's a company that has goals around sustainability, and so it would actually be attractive to them to locate in a state that has a clean grid.
That's a good point. I should work for ACCD for a little while. I have a better answer to your question. Okay, so 20 minutes ago, I said we had 10 slides left. We still have 10 slides left. So,
Yeah, we're doing good. All right.
okay, some of these slides are actually pretty quick. This is just kind of an example of, hey, we have a lot of distributed energy resources online. I'll talk about some of the other ones in a sec. And what does that mean for planning for the future grid? How do we orchestrate the generation, which is intermittent, with the load that we have and increasing load to the extent, our electrification comes to fruition? And so I'd say, there's a star on this. This is a presentation from one of the labs, I believe, or from the Department of Energy. We're pretty far up this curve, where we say very high level of renewable energy, EV integration, DER, distributed energy resource integration, that is needed. And we're really looking to push our utilities to have better distribution system planning, to better orchestrate the grid, use the data that's available through advanced metering infrastructure, through the metering on these generation resources, to predict what is going to happen, not just system wide, but on an individual circuit. Do you have neighborhoods that are seeing a lot of EVs, and is that going to have a different impact on that certain substation than a different neighborhood and may not have much uptake of electrification? And so, we're really thinking a lot about this. This is part of the resilience proceeding that I'm talking about. How do we plan for the future? How do we measure where we're going? And what is the value of it?
So
Yeah, Rep. Steele?
I should know the answer to this question, but you know, so there's a lot of use of resilience and adaptation interchangeably. You talk about the resilience proceeding and what it will address and how that relates to adaptation to climate change and the energy transition.
Right. So we think about resilience as the like how long it's avoiding those major disruptions, and it's all about how long of a duration that we're out for, how fast is it to respond to outages. Reliability is really, we want reliable service that's on regularly. And then resilience is responding to those major events that, put us out. And is the goal zero? Is that realistic? Or is the goal something different? Right now, the metrics that are in place are something different. The target is not zero. And that's part of what the resilience proceeding is going to be about, is what are the appropriate metrics and how do we value investments like undergrounding or hardening the lines? Like what kind of value does that provide to not having to repair a line potentially, or the value of less a shorter duration of the outage, right? Or response time and what that means for customers. And so we're really trying to dive into those aspects of resilience. Adaptation, I think, I'll stop there.
Adaptation to the changing
Right.
climate and the effect that's having on the grid. Yes.
Around yes, I think it's that, but it's also recognizing we're becoming more and more reliant on electricity in our lives, whether it's work remotely to be connected, or to like when we electrify our mobility and our heating sources.
So in this instance, you're talking about this resilience proceeding, that is an adaptation effort, or an effort at adapting to the energy transition and the changing climate's impacts on our election. I thought we should that thing.
Coffee.
New bells.
Yeah, keep that on. I guess I haven't thought about the word adaptation in this context so much, but in responding to you, I do think that it falls under, it's a way that we're adapting. We may be doing this anyway in terms of us electrifying, if it is a cost-effective solution for Vermonters. Well, we want less long interruptions in service anyway. On top of that, it is climate changes, these storms are affecting our infrastructure.
I thought you had.
Sorry, no.
Rep. Morrow?
So in the Velco report, they had a couple of scenarios going on. Do you guys interact with Velco a lot? Or you
Yes.
Most, yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised that they didn't have, they didn't incorporate any load management or storage into their projections. They talked about it extensively in the back, but I think given where we're at right now, that was interesting to me. Are they going to be incorporating that in the next plan, or I mean, what's your comment on that?
So, there is a proceeding to talk about the structure of the long range plan and how to incorporate that, and that's before the Public Utility Commission. I think we filed comments on that last week, kind of to your end, like raising some of those questions. I think this is the next slide. So yes, I just have that up for you to look at, but I'll answer your question first. Yes, the Velco long range plan was designed to look at a worst case scenario, right? So it said, what is the load if we don't make our load flexible, if we don't manage our electric vehicle fleet coming online, if we don't have more and more storage resources, so that what the job of, at least in the current iteration, what the job of the plan is to say, hey, here's the investments we're going to need to make unless we make smaller investments to avoid those. And so what happens is the long range plan says, okay, we have these constraints, and there are some that are generation based and there's some that are load based, and the utilities are then assigned, there's a lead utility for each constraint, and they have to go through and do a reliability plan. And that reliability plan needs to analyze the solutions. And in a lot of the load related constraints, for instance, the first solution is, well, let's just account for the load flexibility we already have built in through electric vehicles, right? 30% of our electric vehicles right now are on a managed rate, and 65 to 75% of new electric vehicle purchases are going on to an electric vehicle rate. So there was the first tranche of electric vehicle purchases, the rates weren't available for them. And now as they move forward, there are rates available. Most of them are on a rate. So you have a constraint that's like, oh, this could be avoided with a 75 megawatt reduction in peak load. Well, we may get 60 megawatts of that, or may get it all just from electric vehicles from what we're already doing. And the utilities will analyze that. And if we don't get there with what we're already doing, then it analyzes, well, what do we need with additional storage? What do we need with additional solar if that peak was during the day? What do we need with, other load flexible resources, or efficiency would be first choice also. And so that structure of the report is like worst case scenario. And then we have options before us that the utilities analyze to solve for. The question you're asking is, well, should they really be looking at or as I interpret it, should they look at the worst case scenario, or should we incorporate some of the load management that we're expecting to happen first? And I think that question will be answered through the proceeding.
Or both. I mean, they could have a worst case and then.
Yes.
It seemed like they only had two scenarios. Like, given the sophistication of what they're doing, they could have another scenario or two incorporating dynamics that we're already using in our grid management. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I don't want to get hung up on that. You can.
No, I do think that's important to point out, though, that we're looking at a worst case scenario map.
Yeah,
Right.
well, in that report.
In that report on the load side in particular, on the generation side, I will say too. So they identified generation constraints as well, and that this really related to what we've been talking about, right? There's areas of the transmission grid that are more saturated with the distributed energy resources that I showed you on the previous slide. You can see in the northern part of the state, that pink area is 0 to 25 megawatts of additional solar could be built without the need for a transmission upgrade. And so, and in the southern part of the state, there's a lot more headroom. And so the question is how do we direct the new resources to the areas of the state with headroom? And I think that's partially a policy discussion. It's partially a utility discussion, and to the extent that they're procuring power through solicitations for it. But the question is there, and in what they found in this report is that we could get up to about a little over 1,000 megawatts of solar capacity if it was sited properly. That's kind of a big if, but if it's sited properly, we could get to that without transmission upgrades. I showed you on that other chart that we have 42 to 50 megawatts a year of solar that's going to be necessary in order to meet our new targets. Well, if it's 50 megawatts, if our load grows and it's really 50 megawatts, that's 6 years before we get to pretty close to 1,000 megawatts solar. Or maybe it's 7 or 8, but we're gonna get there. And the question is how do we avoid that? And what do we do when those costs happen? And do ratepayers pay those, or are there mechanisms to encourage new renewables without incurring those costs? I'll stop there on the transmission side. The chart on the right side in the middle, I guess, is a distribution map of this is GMP's territory of where there's headroom on their distribution system to locate additional generation. And you can see the red, it's just kind of like a traffic light, right? Red is there's not more headroom here for new generation. And if new generation does locate in that area, then there's an additional cost to that. And so how do we encourage the resources to locate in the green, right? Is the question. And does it cost more? They locate in the red because land it costs less, perhaps. There's a lot of reasons for that, but and does land cost more in the green areas, and does that raise the PPA price? These are the questions we need to battle with. I don't think the additional cost is zero. It's greater than zero. What that exact cost is a hard number to pin down, but we need to be incorporating that into our thinking as we encourage new generation.
Yep. How many slides do we have left?
7 maybe.
Okay, Rep. Howard.
Made it through
So
2.
back on the left, and I think BEC came in with this, so they're essentially, BEC has no need for additional solar capacity because solar capacity would have to be exported a greater distance to the load.
Yeah, that pink area aligns pretty well with
Within
BEC's territory.
And that's what
Right.
they. Okay.
Rep. Torrey.
I think this is a quick question. So the CPG process is a big tool, obviously, in siting, right? And the PUC has that authority. But you're talking about a much higher level of planning.
I am, and there's an interconnection process, right? And so if in the GMP map here, if more of this turns red, right, then GMP will say, no, we can't interconnect without a big increase in cost, right? Or you have to go to a different area, which, presumably you're going to the area where you can offer the lowest price, right, first. And so if we're moving further and further away, then that speaks to potential for cost to go up.
Rep.
And
Salvo.
just an observation, I think, based on the green on that map, topography has a huge part of that, why it's not being built out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
red is the Champlain Valley, right? Great. Okay, I ran up to this chart, the slide before. The point of this is really the variability of load and generation, right? The EVs are happening at, certain times of day when you come home. Heat pumps are in the winter, primarily if they're being used for heating. And we need to match supply and demand. The renewable energy credit process is an annual basis, so you can comply with the renewable energy standard with RECs that are all generated in July if you want, and then purchase dirty power in January, and you've complied with the renewable energy standard. That's not the goal of what utilities try and do, but as we go forward, we may need to think about more timely accounting for those renewable energy credits to better match supply and demand. So we may want quarterly accounting so that the RECs produced in January through March kind of actually match up with your load in that's going to come with a whole different set of costs and benefits. And that's, I think, we need to sit with what kind of things we have now a little bit, but that's like a 5 to 10 years out thing that I just wanted to point out. We need to be prepared for that orchestration. Reliability and resilience. This is the slide I said that that resilience proceeding that already talked about, but really resilience solution, undergrounding lines, relocating them to the roadside, line hardening, kind of those spacer cables that you see, the little star-like things on lines if you're driving around, other vegetation management. We really need the utilities to look at all these options and say, this is the most cost-effective solution going forward for the next 10 years, given what we know about our system, our forecasted load, and what's happening with the climate. Okay, I think there's like 3 more slides. This is all energy storage and other flexible resources. Right now, we have almost 75 megawatts of operational batteries on the system, and another 38 that are permitted or in the permitting process. So that's a significant amount of energy storage already on our system. Remember, our peak is 900 megawatts or so. There are another 250 megawatts of transmission scale batteries, so that in the ISO New England queue, so they have submitted an interconnection request and are in line to be interconnected regionally. That would be these are just ones that would be located in Vermont if they come to fruition. There's some uncertainty about those, but people are looking to locate them in Vermont. Storage is not the only way to manage load or generation for that matter. We have electric vehicle rates. I mentioned earlier, time of use rates. There's some peak hour reduction efforts programs from Green Mountain Power and Burlington Electric, water heater interruption, and then some other, like, I almost call them behavioral programs like voluntary compensation, like when Burlington Electric Department issues with the city issues a request to defeat the peak, and people actually respond to that and reduce their load at the time of peak, and it comes at a big cost savings to ratepayers. This puts our deployment on storage in New England context. We are about 9% of our peak currently. That's from the 2024 summer peak, with 74 megawatts of storage. If we include what's under construction and permitting in Vermont, not those transmission level ones, we're at 13%. And where other states in New England have targets, we put these on here. Connecticut is currently at 0.3% of their peak, Maine at 3.3%, and Massachusetts at 2.7%. So we're far ahead of the curve, New England wide. And we're even ahead of Massachusetts goals. And we are ahead, we're kind of on pace to exceed the Connecticut and Maine goals way before that they even get there. So I just wanted to put it where we are in storage in context with New England. Pretty.
I'm sorry. Yeah, just a quick question about how do our peaks differ?
How our peaks differ. So there's different ways to count your peaks. So there's time of your load at the time of New England peak, and then that's the same peak for everybody. But then your own state has a peak, and that's like Vermont's non-coincident peak is the term. It's not coincident with the regional peak, and then each utility has its own peak, which may be different than the Vermont peak as well. We also have monthly peaks, which are another story, but how transmission gets charged. So different, and each of those peaks have different values associated with them. If you can deploy storage or other flexible resources at any one of those different peaks, you're providing value for ratepayers. I won't go into detail on electric vehicle rates, just so you know that all utilities are on a path for having them if they don't have them already. There's some utilities that have requested and been granted extensions by the Public Utility Commission so that they can get the either the equipment or the rate design in place ahead of those rates being deployed. So they're coming for everybody, and some utilities have gone first. Okay, so the last three slides, I'm past 11:30, so they're just a few slides on programs. So I don't have to go through these. That would be relevant. And then there's a number of slides in the appendix as well that you might be interested in, that kind of touch on all of the issues we've been talking about. So I will stop there and see if there's any other questions.
Additional questions?
You did come back just for a Q&A session.
Happy to come back.
Great. What was that, round 3? Or was that
This was
round
3,
2?
yeah, this was 3.
3?
I'm keeping score.
Great.
Yeah, just, so how much did we pay Sustainable Energy for their help to do this or whatever they did?
Well, so that was a modeling effort in part of the department's public engagement and process to implement our energy plan to come up with policy proposals, which we proposed in January of last year on the renewable energy standard. Their modeling, I believe, was I think it was $180,000. That included the stakeholder engagement and the use of the model, which we do still have available. It's on our website for anybody that uses. It's an Excel-based model.
Thank you.
All righty. Right before, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hopefully that was a good grounding and we can talk about policies going forward.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all your time. I know we've been time intensive.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm happy to try and help. And so thank you for having me.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If we can
Thanks.
stay on live for a minute, we just have a little mini chit chat. TJ, thanks again so much. Yeah. All right. So just a couple of housekeeping things. We did get a committee liaison from our committee assigned to every other committee, which is great. So if all of our committee reps could please, and I can send an email if you want, but please reach out to the committees that you're assigned to. Copy the chair and vice chair, or copy the whole committee, I guess. Why don't you copy this? Yeah, just send it to the whole committee and say, you're the representative from House Energy and Digital Technology. And, want to keep in touch and, thank you so much. And then for the committees that you're assigned to, just try to keep an eye on their agenda or find out who maybe is their liaison to our committee, and just try to keep in touch if there's any of their work that you think we should know about, or vice versa. And then the other thing I just wanted to give folks a heads up on, which I did the other day, but so we do have our budget letter from the Appropriations Committee just alerting us to the fact that we need to start our budget work. And our budget memo is due February 26th. So we need to start taking some testimony on budget requests. They're going to fall under our areas of purview. So I will try to send an email to the whole committee today, just as a reminder, like, here are the areas we need to look out for. One of the things that we could do right off the bat is I've been trying to learn a little bit more about the Department of Corrections $3 million Wi-Fi funding. I'll forward everybody a little bit of email of information on that. We could recommend that. We'll have a much broader committee discussion of that.
Already forthcoming, it just was in the works, wasn't that?
So it looks like there's going to be some possible snags to getting federal funding for that. So one of the things that we can talk about as a committee is whether we would like to recommend that we include it in the state budget, include it in the general fund. But we'll have to take more testimony, have a full committee discussion talk about whether we think that's a good idea. But one thing we could do is say, hey, if federal funds are not going to be forthcoming for this, do we want to, as a committee, recommend that appropriations consider including that $3 million in this year's budget? That's just an example of the kinds of things that we could put in our letter if we all agreed. So we're going to need to be hearing from our appropriations reps, I think pretty big time, on what areas of the budget are we going to need to weigh in on. So I'll let you start diving in on energy.
Yeah, actually, I looked at the summary document, and all of the items were for IT. There were no energy
Okay,
items.
great. So it sounds like Rep Campbell's going to be on the hot seat here. I think Agency of Digital Services has a $15 million funding request we're going to need to look into and weigh in on. And that's where Scott is this morning. He's at approps. So I just wanted to get that on everybody's radar. So please reach out to your committees. And then next week, we need to start focusing. I don't want to leave that till the last minute. I'm worried. I just want to make sure we allow enough time for that. Okay,
Do you remember what my second committee is?
I do. And Jack's going to send out
At the end there.
Jack's going to make the document pretty and send it all out to us and put it on our bulletin board.
Okay, perfect.
But you are,
Out here.
House Environment and Corrections and Institutions.
Correction.
I can read the final list right now. We have Ag is Rep Bailey. Approps is Scott for digital infrastructure and Dara for energy. Commerce is Rep Howland. Corrections, Morrow. Education, Sebelia. Environment, Morrow. General and Housing, Campbell. GovOps, Sebelia. Healthcare, Torrey. Human Services, Torrey. Judiciary, Southworth. Transportation, Southworth. And Ways and Means, Kleppner. But we'll get it posted. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about.
So we just need to visit those committees or just, what are we?
You can send them an email. So when you can type in House Ag or whatever, send them an email and say, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Representative Richard Bailey. I am the liaison from Energy and Digital Infrastructure to House Ag. I'll be trying to stay in touch with your agenda, but please reach out to me if you're working on projects that you think involve energy or digital infrastructure.
Okay.
And someone may or may not write you back. The chair may write you back. And then at some point, it'll just be on their radar. So I don't know if the Department of Ag comes in and says, we need an $80 million IT upgrade. They might think, oh, we'll ask Richard what he thinks about that.
All right.
All right.
I'll knock them down to 75.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think we.
$5 million for me.
Yeah.